Hey guys, EvanNova95 here, and welcome to the first installment of Versus Series Q&A, the series where I answer your questions and criticisms relating to the latest episodes of Star Wars Versus Series. Today we will be discussing your thoughts on Season 7, Episode 8, Mace Windu vs. Darth Caedus. However, before we get into the thick of things, I want to just take a moment to say thank you all so much for the overwhelming feedback from this video. I really tried to put my best foot forward as a writer with this one, and judging by like ratios and comments, it seems to have paid off in spades. Or balances if you prefer a Sabak reference. Honestly, taking a break from scripting for a while was actually pretty good for me in the end, as it gave me time to refine my style and develop new and better ways of articulating my arguments. I wanted to go for something of a blend between worlds with this one, a combination of my Versus series and my The Story Of videos. Rather than just standing here and yammering about which dude is better at swinging a lightsaber, this time around I wanted to go more in-depth on how their character affects their capabilities. Why is Mace Windu such a good swordsman? Why does Darth Caedus have so many force powers? What about them makes them as strong as they are? Granted, it does make for a rather lengthy experience, and rest assured I will be working to refine that later down the road, but in my defense, I do think the more incremental presentation style makes the whole thing much more digestible. I've always been of the belief that if a video is entertaining enough, length is irrelevant. Plus, don't you want as much of me in your lives as possible? Come back, I was only kidding. Oi. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Our first set of questions comes from Demand360, who just so happened to put 3 of the most common inquiries into one comment, which makes the editing that much easier for me, so thanks for that. Starting with the middle one, since it's the broadest, we have, what was the decision for these 2 specific characters? Why not Mace Windu versus Kyle Katarn? Or Exar Kun or Yoda versus Darth Caedus? I see what you did there. For those of you who don't know, Demand is more than likely referencing the finale preview episode I did for Versus Series Season 4, wherein I asked you guys to vote between Vader, Yoda, and Kun as possible opponents for Caedus. Always nice to see a good double reference. Back when I was planning out this season, I had already locked in Kyle Katarn to face Malgus in the mini-marathon, so that's why I never considered putting him up against Mace, as great of a match as that would be. While I did briefly consider bringing back Yoda or Exar Kun to face Darth Caedus, the long and short of it is, those matches simply didn't appeal to me at the time. I'd already laid out the Darth Vader vs. Yoda who wins videos, so I was kinda Yoda'd out, and Exar Kun was my least favorite prospect of the 3 from the start, and that sadly didn't change with time. I wasn't necessarily against using him, but I was sure I could do better. Anyway, as for why I picked Mace Windu and Darth Caedus specifically, well, there are several reasons. The first comes down to a matter of style. I haven't featured Mace in a versus match in 7 years, and I haven't featured Caedus in 6. Not to sound arrogant or anything, but my analytical and writing capabilities have improved dramatically since then, and as such the idea of refining my old breakdowns and examining these characters with a more, shall we say, mature perspective was very appealing. Getting a bit more personal, there are the matters of character and thematic overtones. While there are a few noticeable differences in how they are portrayed, me and my friends have always viewed Jaina Solo as the Mace Windu of her era. We know Caedus is capable of holding his own against Jaina in a fight, but the question then becomes, how would he deal with the OG Windu? That's kind of fun. Mace himself is even referenced in Legacy of the Force Invincible when Jaina sees Caedus perform the Shatterpoint ability, so it's not like the 2 have never been name-dropped in the same work. Furthermore, Mace and Caedus actually have a surprising amount of overlapping character traits. Both are extremely powerful individuals commonly regarded as second only to the absolute apexes of their eras. Both toe the line between the light side and dark side of the Force despite their loyalty to their respective orders, and both feel love to an extreme degree yet manifest it in almost diametrically opposing fashions. Taking all those factors and more into account, the match just seemed right to me. Moving on, we have Damon's first question. In the physical attributes part, you make it very known that Caedus' missing hand matters little due to his great power. Do you feel this specifically about Caedus, or could this be said about other missing hand characters such as Darth Traya and Wolf Sazin? As with most things, I believe the missing hand factor varies depending on a character's personality and capabilities. I really like that you brought up Darth Traya and Wolf Sazin because those two, to me, actually epitomize the two main routes a Force wielder can take to compensate should they end up losing a limb. Aside from getting a prosthetic, of course. While a very talented duelist in her own right, Traya's true areas of expertise were as an academic and Force wielder. And upon losing her hand, she simply doubled down on these specializations by adopting the art of telekinetic lightsaber combat as her primary means of physical battle. Not an unintelligent move in and of itself, but it did leave her with very little to fall back on once her TK sabers were destroyed. Wolf Sazin, meanwhile, took what was, in my view, a much more well-rounded approach. As noted by multiple sources, the Jedi Master retrained himself to fight with just his left arm, and as we can clearly see by his feats in the later Legacy comics, his threat level didn't seem affected in any significant way. Darth Caedus may have more in common with Traya on a character level, but in terms of martial talent and adaptability, he is much more akin to Wolf Sazin. Obviously, he is stronger, he would absolutely demolish Sazin in a one-on-one fight, but in terms of the two's innate ability to adapt, they are quite similar. I know a lot of people were surprised that I analyzed Caedus after he got his hand lopped off, but the simple fact of the matter is that injury was never stated to affect his level of danger in any serious way. Do remember that he still managed to very nearly kill Jaina without his hand, and Jaina was one of the strongest Jedi alive at the time. As I said in the video, pretty much every Jedi and Sith worth a damn is ambidextrous. It's literally one of the most consistent elements of combat in the franchise. If you want a direct example from the lore, the novel Darth Bane Path of Destruction by Drew Karpyshyn literally states that ambidextrous saber usage is part of the standardized curriculum at the Sith Academy, so it's not like it's anything special. Moving into Damon's last question, we have, I've noticed that only one matchup this season has not used an NJO character, Grievous vs. Zana. Was there meant to be a specific NJO theme this season? Yes. Yes, there was. I've made it no secret over the years that I'm a huge NJO fan, and frankly, I wanted to use this season as an excuse to express my fanboyism. NJO-era characters are some of the strongest and most versatile combatants in the entire Star Wars series, and it still baffles my mind that they don't get the same degree of coverage in the Versus community given to other eras like the prequels and Old Republic. Some say it's because most of the NJO material is found solely in text, but what kind of an excuse is that? Force forbid you peel your face away from the TV or computer screen for an hour and read a book. Oh no, did I just become my mother? Anyway, yeah, wanted to feature some lesser known names, theme fully intentional. Next up, we have Austin Ames, who asks, so, did your views on Darth Caedus change since your Darth Vader vs. Caedus? Oh boy, where do I begin with this one? I'm gonna be honest, if that video wasn't a season finale and didn't have as many views as it does, I would have deleted it by now. My presentation of Darth Caedus in that video was so cringe I could barely get through it when I rewatched it to help me lay out my pre-notes. My analytical skills back then may not have been on the level they are now, but I'm not going to use that as an excuse. The Darth Caedus breakdown presented in that video was awful and a total disservice to the character, and for that, I am sorry. While it does have its flaws, the Luke Skywalker vs. Mace Windu video at least has its own old school charm to it, and there were several points presented that fed into my current Mace breakdown. Darth Vader vs. Darth Caedus was just bad. For whatever stupid reason, I was really displeased with Caedus' character at the time, and as such my breakdown of him had a serious negative bias. I have since mellowed out and am no longer of the opinion that Darth Vader could defeat Darth Caedus. Would it be a close fight? Oh yes, there's no such thing as a stomp when Vader is your opponent, and I would even argue that he has certain advantages over Caedus that Mace lacks, namely in the area of durability. That being said, like with Mace, I believe Darth Caedus is at least on par with his grandfather as a martial artist, is slightly more powerful in the Force, and when you consider the added factor of Vader's weakness to Force lightning, I think the young Sith Lord has it in him to pull out a narrow win. All in all, this video bad, this video good. I appreciate Darth Caedus much more now and will endeavor to do better by him in the years to come. Our next question comes from Spike6072, and he writes, "Am I the only one amazed that Aurra Sing was still alive and still a bounty hunter by the time of Legacy of the Force? Because I did the math, looking up her age in Wikipedia, and she was in her early 90s at the time of Legacy of the Force." I answered this one in the comments, but I just wanted to address it here since so many people brought it up. Yeah, Aurra is confirmed to have been born in 51 BBY, and Legacy of the Force Tempest takes place in 40 ABY, which would make her roughly 91 years old at the time. I know this sounds kinda strange to more casual viewers, but the thing you need to remember is not only is Aurra very skilled when it comes to survival, but her exact species has never actually been confirmed. While she is classified as a near-human hybrid, what exactly she is a hybrid of is unknown, even to herself. Given what little she knows about her past coupled with her biological makeup, Singh and others have speculated that her father might very well have been an Anzadi. As noted by the Essential Guide to Alien Species, Anzadi can breed with a variety of near-human species and have ridiculously long lifespans, not even reaching puberty until 100 years old. This means even if Aurra has only 50% Anzadi blood, she would still have a natural lifespan in the multi-hundreds, which makes her performance against Caedus not really that radical in the grand scheme of things. Hell, she could very well still be alive during the time frame of the Legacy comics for all we actually know. Next up, we have MC Reichik, who had several popular constructive criticisms and a few basic questions. First up, we have 4735. Mara was actually stated in the NJO sourcebook as Luke's most powerful ally during the Vong War. This is then followed up by a quote from said sourcebook which refers to Mara as Luke's most powerful supporter and ally during the war. This rebuttal is likely referring to my statements regarding Mara Jade Skywalker's power level in relation to her peers. As I stated, she was more renowned for being one of the most well-rounded fighters on the Council rather than the strongest. While I was aware of this quote before I made the video, I think where MC and I differ is in our interpretation of the phrase powerful supporter. In my view, the sourcebook statement simply refers to Mara's degree of loyalty to her husband rather than her innate power. Don't get me wrong, Mara is very strong. However, her accolades and feats simply don't measure up to figures like Kip Duran and Kyle Katarn. Speaking of Kyle, it's also worth noting that Darth Caedus at least seemed to hold the Battle Master in higher esteem than his aunt, whom he even referred to as comparatively crude when it comes to Force skills. Hell, even if you want to get more specific, Kyle pretty much defeated Mara in Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith. And yes, I know she sorta surrendered on purpose and was pre-Prime at the time, but let's not forget, Kyle still held the dominant edge for most of the game and was not at his peak either, so the point still stands. Who knows, maybe I'll do another Who Wins episode with them. Would you like that? Anyway, while I do think she's up there, my interpretation of the lore leads me to believe that Mara is not the second strongest on the NJO Council. MC's next criticism is, you spent a good deal of time examining the factors behind the fight between Mace and Deepa, so why didn't you mention the context behind the Mara vs. Caedus fight? This is then followed up by a lengthy explanation about Mara's environmental advantages, her emotional state, and then a quote from Star Wars Insider issue 107 which states that Mara was fully aware that she couldn't beat Caedus in a straight fight. Starting from the top, Yeah, I do think my explanation of Mara vs. Caedus could have been a bit more detailed. That was actually a section that went through several rewrites. I definitely didn't give it the technical explanation that I should have, but I think the basic point was conveyed. As for Mara's supposed bloodlust, while I agree she conducted herself very aggressively, particularly when Ben was mentioned, its actual impact on the fight is a bit hard to determine. Not only is Mara's style naturally aggressive, but she, like many of the NJO Jedi, has a different method for regulating her emotions than the Jedi of the Old Order. It's less bloodlust and more righteous fury, using the emotions to bolster combat effectiveness, but not letting said emotions cloud judgment. I don't believe Mara would have performed nearly as well as she did against Caedus had she been going full Dark Rage mode, because Caedus would have just used it against her like he's ought to do. Mara uses smart tactics in this fight that a bloodlusted individual simply wouldn't think to do. Yes, Caedus states later that she came at him like a madwoman, but rage and fury are not the same thing. One consumes you while the other motivates you. That's where I see the difference, and that's why I don't harp on it in the breakdown. As for the insider quote, well, I'm going to be honest with you, MC, I had totally forgotten that quote was a thing when I made the video. Quotes from Star Wars Insider are hard to come by, and it didn't really come up in my research. That's totally on me. Granted, I don't think the quote changes much of anything in the long term, as even if Mara knew she couldn't beat Caedus in a duel, she still performed very well against him before being killed, and doesn't really affect Caedus' ranking that much. Mara is very clearly weaker than other opponents Caedus has faced, so all it really does is affirm my placement of her in the feat hierarchy section. Still, would have been nice to have though, and if anyone could hook me up with a reliable source to find insider quotes, I would immensely appreciate it. Next up, he says, 5137, hyped! As am I. After that, he asks, 5215, what is this comic? That's actually stylized fan art, though if you want to know what comic it's referencing to, it's Star Wars Dark Empire Issue 1. Next up, we have 5219, I mean, there was nothing stopping Luke from utilizing those objects himself. He noticed and identified them the moment he entered the room. True, but he still didn't know the exact layout of the room the same way Caedus did due to the fact that he spent much less time there, and therefore the Sith Lord still had a tiny bit of an edge. At 1 hour 20 minutes 34 seconds, Legacy of the Force Jaina being Grand Master tier? This is one instance where I think one extra word in the script probably would have helped. In my view, Jaina by the end of Legacy of the Force was Grand Master level, but very low Grand Master level. Like, just barely scraping her chin on the surface of the tier, kinda like Shaak Ti. I should have put more emphasis on that rather than just a blanketed statement. Logistics aside, Jaina did prove herself to be at the very least on par with Darth Caedus in terms of just pure martial arts, and did successfully land several force strikes against him in their second duel, which aren't exactly anti-feats. While I do think Caedus would defeat End of Legacy of the Force Jaina if they had an all-out deathmatch rather than the circumstantial duel they ended up having, I also believe it would still be an epic battle where it would take a long time for one to overcome the other. Let's be real, if Caedus was just naturally several tiers above Jaina in strength, then even with the whole surprise attack thing that happened at the start of their second fight, he would have been able to just snap his fingers and kill her on the spot. But he didn't. She resisted him and resisted him well, and I just can't bring myself to believe that someone who isn't at least knocking on the door of Grand Master level is capable of such a performance. I'm not saying End of Legacy of the Force Jaina would be an equal match for Luke Skywalker or Yoda, that would be completely ridiculous, but I do think she would be a pretty legitimate opponent for some of the middle tier Grandmasters like Nomi Sunrider or Cole Skywalker. Still, I could have explained that better. 1 hour, 22 minutes, 23 seconds. Saba being Grand Master level, while the likes of Mara and Kyle being only Council level? I have to say no to that. Hell to the no. Don't be so quick to dismiss Saba Sabatine, my friend. She's actually a bit of a sleeper when it comes to strength. Setting aside that the Barabel was named Grand Master in Fate of the Jedi, since that of course was just a temporary measure, Saba has several very impressive feats that speak towards her level of ability. She stomped Leia Organa solo multiple times in their training, bested Welk, who at the time was drawing on the force potential of the entire Gorog nest to amp his force strength, held off Corran Horn in a sparring session that was specifically described as being incredibly dangerous to anyone who wasn't a Council Master, was acknowledged by Darth Caedus to be a potentially difficult opponent, comfortably defeated Kenth Hamner, a fellow Council Master who was the temporary Grand Master at the time, and most impressively of all, killed an Abeloth body with her bare fucking claws and teeth alone. If none of that screams at least low Grand Master level, I don't know what does. As for Mara and Kyle, yeah, that was definitely a mischaracterization on my part. Kyle Katarn is without question low to possibly even mid Grand Master level. I honestly see him as being ever so slightly ahead of Count Dooku, who we know for a fact can at least hold his ground against a high Grand Master level Yoda. Mara Jade Skywalker, on the other hand, is a bit more tricky to scale. While unbelievably strong, her biggest advantages in a fight have consistently been her cunning and unorthodoxy rather than her native strength. Again, this isn't to say she's weak, she's not. It's just that she's a bit more specialized than some of her contemporaries. In my view, Mara is either at the absolute tippity top of Council level, or somewhere in the bottom rung of Grand Master level. While she is noted to possess superior sensing and tracking-based abilities than her husband, she definitely didn't compare to him in overall combat viability, and again, in my view, was slightly below some of her contemporaries. But I'll explore that more in the future. Our last question/criticism comes from Raul Tejada, who writes, "Very well produced video, but I disagree with the outcome. While I agree with the fact that Caedus is a stronger force wielder than Mace, I think Vapaad wasn't taken into account as much as it deserves here. While Caedus could definitely compete with Windu as a lightsaber duelist and outstrips him in force abilities, I think the Vapaad effect more than makes up for this. Caedus needs to use his full power to defeat Windu. He can't without it, and that's where I disagree with the verdict. Mace would win in the same way he did against Sidious. Just my opinion. No problem, man." The Vapaad effect is always going to be a contentious factor in any fight involving Windu, mainly because its exact mechanics are both heavily fleshed out and painfully vague. We know how it's used in certain scenarios, but not others. I used to view the superconducting loop effect as being the be-all end-all counter to every Sith in existence. However, I've since come to realize that such beliefs were bordering on a no-limits fallacy, which made me change up my tune a bit. In my view, Vapaad is much like any other advanced superconducting loop effect in that it works at its best when both conductors are contributing equally to the emotional cycle. Sith like Darth Sidious, Darth Bane, and Darth Maul are prime candidates to be undermined by Mace's application of Vapaad due to the fact that all three of them apply what I would refer to as the burning aspect of the dark side of the Force. While by no means unintelligent, when those three are engaged in a serious fight, they essentially devolve into berserkers who channel their power through hot, animalistic fury, and as a result would provide Mace's Vapaad with an almost endless pool of dark power to draw on. By contrast, Sith like Darth Tyrannus, Darth Vader, and Darth Caedus apply more the chilling aspect of the dark side. While all three do have their moments of fire, it's not their go-to mindset. They value elegance and authority, cool, righteous indignation above bloodlust and blind fury. They are Sith who fight with pride and inhuman detachment in place of raw anger, and as a result, would not be as susceptible to Mace's use of Vapaad. You are absolutely right, Tejada, in that Caedus would need his full power in order to defeat Windu. However, the way in which Caedus channels his power is, in my view, not the same as Sidious's despite their comparable levels of power, and therefore would not produce the same results. Ice will not power a furnace as well as fire, but both will still burn you if you touch them for too long. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this first installment of Versus Series Q&A. As always, please leave your thoughts and questions in the comments section below. I realize I didn't answer too many questions in the grand scheme of things, but I wanted to get this video out as soon as possible, and more to the point, I wanted to focus mainly on the most popular questions relating specifically to the Mace vs. Caedus match. I'll be sure to answer more in future installments. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and I'll see you guys later.